The emergency alarm echoed through the Galactic Council chamber for the third time in 2 weeks. Ambassador Zephoria pressed her crystalline hands against the smooth surface of her communication panel, her body trembling with fear. The holographic display in front of her showed a map of the galaxy with red dots marking the locations where entire colonies had simply vanished. 47 different alien species had gathered in this massive chamber, but none of them had any answers. The Drachnari, representatives usually so confident and warlike, sat quietly in their seats. The peaceful Verdanians, who normally offered solutions to every problem, just stared at the growing number of red dots on the map. Even the ancient elders from the core worlds seemed confused and frightened. Zephoria activated the main display and began speaking to the assembled council. In the past 3 cycles, we have lost 17 colonies across 8 different sectors. No distress calls were received from any of these worlds. No wreckage has been found. No survivors have been located. The colonies are simply gone, as if they never existed. Murmurs of fear and confusion filled the chamber. The representative from the Aquatic Federation raised one of his tentacles. Have any patterns been identified in these attacks? That is our greatest concern, Zephoria replied, her voice shaking slightly. The missing colonies are all located near what we have long considered dead space regions too dangerous for our species to explore. Far away from the council chamber, Commander Jake Martinez stood on the bridge of the human diplomatic vessel Aurora. He was reading the same intelligence reports that had been shared with the Galactic Council, but unlike the alien representatives, Jake was not paralyzed by fear. He was angry Jake had been born on one of humanity's frontier colonies. He knew what it was like to live on the edge of known space, where every day brought new dangers. The idea that 17 entire colonies could just disappear without a trace made his blood boil. Someone was responsible for this, and Jake intended to find out who. Lieutenant Amy Rodriguez, his tactical officer, looked up from her station. Commander, I've been analyzing the data from the missing colonies. There's something the council might have missed. Jake walked over to Amy's console and studied the information she had compiled. Amy was one of the best tactical minds in the app. Human fleet, and if she had found something, it was worth listening to. What do you see, Amy? Amy pointed to the star chart on her screen. Look at the timing of the disappearances, sir. The first colony to vanish was on the outer edge of Sector 12. The second was in Sector 11, slightly closer to the core worlds. The third was even closer to civilized space. Jake studied the pattern and felt a cold realization wash over him. They're not random attacks. Someone is moving inward, testing our defenses as they go. Exactly, sir. Whoever's doing this is being very systematic about it. They're learning about our capabilities and weaknesses with each attack. Dr. Helen Brooks, the Aurora's xenobiologist, been listening to their conversation from her position at the science station? Helen had studied alien behavior for over 20 years, and she had developed an instinct for recognizing patterns that others missed. Commander, Helen said, walking over to join Jake and Amy, I think there's something else we need to consider. The missing colonies weren't chosen randomly. They were all isolated, with minimal contact with the larger galactic community. Frowned. What are you suggesting, Doctor? I'm suggesting that whoever is doing this doesn't want witnesses. They're not just attacking these colonies for resources or territory. They're studying them, learning about the different species that make up our galactic civilization. The thought sent a chill down Jake's spine. If Helen was right, then these weren't random acts of violence or piracy. They were something much more dangerous, a methodical intelligence-gathering operation by an unknown enemy. Meanwhile, on the remote mining world of Kepler 44-B, Foreman Pete Collins was dealing with a crisis of his own. The automated mining systems that his 37 colonists depended on had been malfunctioning for the past week. First, the deep core extractors had gone offline. Then the atmospheric processors had started showing error messages. Even the basic life support systems were having problems. Pete had been running mining operations on frontier worlds for 15 years, and he had never seen anything like this. The equipment failures seemed too coordinated to be coincidental, but he couldn't figure out what was causing them. Collins to all stations, Pete announced over the colony's communication system. I need everyone to report to the main facility immediately. We're going to run a full diagnostic on all systems. As the colonists gathered in the main building, Pete noticed that the external sensors were also starting to malfunction. The security cameras that monitored the perimeter of the colony were showing nothing but static, and the motion detectors were giving false readings every few minutes. Pete's assistant, a young engineer named Betty Walsh, looked worried as she checked her handheld scanner. Pete, I'm not getting any readings from the orbital communication array. It's like something is blocking our signals. Before Pete could respond, all the lights in the facility went out. Emergency lighting activated automatically, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. The colonists looked around nervously there. Voices rising in concern and confusion, Pete grabbed his personal communicator and tried to contact the nearest Colonial Defense Network station. Static filled the channel, but he managed to get through long enough to send a brief message. This is Foreman Pete Collins on Kepler 44 to B. We are experiencing massive system failures and possible hostile contact. Requesting immediate assistance. The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving Pete and his colonists in darkness. Outside the facility, shapes moved in the shadows, too coordinated to be natural, but too quiet to be detected by human senses. Back on Earth, Admiral Lisa Carter was reviewing reports in her office at the Colonial Defense Network headquarters. Lisa had been overseeing humanity's expansion into the galaxy for the past 5 years, and she took pride in the fact that human colonies had one of the lowest casualty rates of any species. The report from Kepler 44 to be changed everything. Pete Collins was an experienced foreman who didn't panic easily. If he was reporting system failures and possible hostile contact, then something serious was happening on that world. Lisa activated her communication system and called an emergency meeting of the Joint Chiefs. Within an hour, the top military leaders of humanity were gathered in the secure briefing room, studying the latest intelligence reports. Gentlemen and ladies, Lisa began, we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Our allies in the Galactic Council are dealing with mysterious colony disappearances, and now one of our own worlds may be under attack. General Robert Hayes, the head of Colonial Marine Operations, leaned forward in his chair. What kind of enemy are we dealing with, Admiral? Lisa activated the holographic display and showed the assembled officers the pattern that Jake Martinez and his team had identified. Unknown, General. But whoever they are, they're smart, patient, and very good at staying hidden. Colonel Frank Turner, who commanded the Rapid Response Forces, studied the data carefully. Admiral, if these attacks are moving inward, toward the core worlds, we need to start evacuating the most vulnerable colonies. I agree, Colonel. But we also need to find out who is behind these attacks and stop them before they reach the more populated systems. As the meeting continued, Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that humanity was about to face its greatest challenge since leaving Earth. The galaxy had been peaceful for decades, different species working together to explore new worlds and share knowledge. Now, something from the dark spaces between the stars was threatening to destroy everything they had built. The question was, would humanity and its allies be ready for whatever was coming? Captain Ryan Foster pushed his reconnaissance ship Valiant deeper into the forbidden zones than any human vessel had dared to go before. The space around him was dark and cold, filled with the kind of silence that made even experienced spacers nervous. But Ryan had volunteered for this mission, and he was determined to find answers. His crew was small but skilled. Corporal Danny Walsh handled demolitions and security, while Lieutenant Grace Parker managed communications and sensors. All three of them knew they might not return from this mission, but someone had to investigate the disappearances, and the regular fleet was too valuable to risk. Captain Grace said from her station, I'm picking up debris signatures in Sector 7 Alpha. It looks like the remains of a space station. Ryan felt his pulse quicken. This was the first time anyone had found physical evidence of what happened to the missing colonies. Take us in, Grace, but keep us ready to jump out of here fast if we need to. As the Valiant approached the debris field, Ryan could see twisted metal and broken hull plates floating in the darkness. The wreckage was scattered over several thousand kilometers, but it was definitely the remains of a Zilithian research station. "Danny, suit up," Ryan ordered. "We're going to board what's left of that station and see what we can find." Danny Walsh was a tough Marine who had served on a dozen frontier worlds. He had seen plenty of combat and wasn't easily scared, but something about this debris field made him nervous. The wreckage looked wrong somehow, as if it had been deliberately torn apart rather than destroyed by weapons fire. The three humans put on their spacesuits and used a small shuttle to reach the largest piece of the station. The section they entered had been the main laboratory, and unlike the other vanished colonies, this one showed clear signs of a fight. Scorch marks covered the walls, and makeshift barricades had been built from overturned tables and equipment. Most importantly, there were bodies. The Zilithian researchers were still at their positions, clutching weapons that Ryan recognized as primitive slug throwers. Captain Grace whispered over the com, "Look at these weapons. No galactic species has used projectile firearms for over a century." Ryan examined one of the weapons more closely. It was crude but effective, designed to fire metal bullets instead of energy beams. The Zilithians must have improvised these when their regular weapons didn't work. Dr. Monica Bell, a forensic specialist who had joined them from the Aurora, carefully examined the scene. Monica had investigated crime scenes on dozens of worlds, and she could read the story that the evidence told. The attack came from multiple directions, Monica explained as she scanned the room. The defenders were overwhelmed quickly, but they managed to put up more resistance than the attackers expected. "Look at these impact marks on the floor and walls. The attackers were using the same kind of projectile weapons." Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. "You're saying the enemy uses primitive weapons?" "Not primitive, Captain. Deliberately simple. Energy weapons create electromagnetic signatures that can be detected across vast distances. Projectile weapons are much harder to track, especially in deep space." Back on Earth, intelligence analyst Kevin Shaw was working late in his office at Colonial Defense Network headquarters. Kevin had been studying the disappearances for weeks, trying to find patterns that the alien investigators had missed. Unlike his alien counterparts, Kevin had access to classified human military databases that contained information about warfare techniques that most species had forgotten. Kevin's computer screen showed a three-dimensional map of the galaxy with the missing colonies marked in red. But Kevin wasn't looking at where the colonies had vanished. He was looking at where the attacks had come from. "Computer, overlay historical data for Sector 7 Alpha through Sector 15 Delta," Kevin commanded. The display changed to show archaeological surveys and deep space exploration records dating back over 1,000 years. What Kevin saw made his blood run cold. Every single attack had originated from regions that ancient galactic records listed as former inhabited zones. Areas where advanced civilizations had once thrived before, mysteriously disappearing. Realized that the attackers weren't invaders from outside the galaxy. They were something that had been here all along, hiding in the ruins of their own ancient empire. Kevin immediately contacted Admiral Carter's office. "Admiral, I need to brief you on the colony disappearances immediately. I think I know who's behind the attacks." Meanwhile, on the border world of New Haven, Sheriff Tony Davis was dealing with problems of his own. New Haven was home to 50,000 human colonists who had come to this world seeking a peaceful life away from the crowded core worlds. Tony had been keeping the peace on frontier worlds for over 20 years, and he had developed good instincts about when trouble was coming. For the past week, Tony had been getting reports of strange seismic readings in the mountains that surrounded New Haven's main settlement. The readings didn't match any known geological activity, and they seemed to be getting stronger each day. Tony's deputy, Maria Santos, thought he was worrying too much. "Tony, those mountains have been quiet for decades. The geological survey said there's no volcanic activity in this region." But Tony wasn't convinced. He had installed motion sensors and night vision cameras around the perimeter of the settlement, and the equipment was picking up movement patterns that seemed to organize to be natural wildlife. "Maria, look at this footage from last night," Tony said, showing her the recordings on his computer screen. "See how these heat signatures move? They're staying in formation, like they're following some kind of tactical pattern." Maria studied the images carefully. The heat signatures were faint, almost invisible, but they did seem to be moving with purpose. "What do you think they are?" "Don't know," Tony replied, "but I'm going to find out. Give me a squad of volunteers with hunting rifles and night vision. Gear, we're going to take a look at those mountains tonight." On the other side of the galaxy, archaeologist Dr. Paul Morgan was making a discovery that would change everything. Paul had been excavating ruins on a supposedly uninhabited world in the Outer Rim territories, hoping to learn more about the ancient civilizations that had once dominated this region of space. The ruins Paul had found were older than anything. In the Galactic databases, the architecture was strange and alien, built from materials that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. But it was the pictographs carved into the walls that made Paul's hands shake as he recorded them. The images told a story of a species that had once ruled this entire arm of the galaxy. They showed great cities and vast fleets of starships, all controlled by tall, gaunt figures that seemed to blend with shadows. But the most disturbing images showed what happened when younger species began to explore the galaxy. The pictographs depicted systematic campaigns of conquest and elimination. The shadow beings had allowed the younger races to develop and expand, studying their capabilities and weaknesses. Then, when the time was right, they had struck with devastating efficiency. But, according to the pictographs, this species hadn't been destroyed. They had simply retreated into the dark spaces between the stars, waiting for the right moment to reclaim their territory. Paul realized with growing horror that the current wave of disappearances wasn't the beginning of an invasion. It was the return of the galaxy's original owners. Paul activated his emergency communicator and sent a priority message to the Colonial Defense Network. "This is Dr. Paul Morgan on Research Expedition Delta 7. I have discovered critical intelligence about the entity responsible for the colony disappearances. The attackers are not invaders. They are the predecessors, the original inhabitants of this galactic region. And according to these ruins, they're just getting started." As Paul's message traveled across the galaxy, the pieces of the puzzle were finally starting to come together. The enemy wasn't using primitive technology because they lacked advanced weapons. They were using older methods because those methods were harder to detect and counter. The predecessors had been watching the younger species for centuries, learning about their capabilities and waiting for the right moment to act. They had allowed civilizations to develop and spread across the galaxy, only so they could study potential threats and eliminate them when necessary now. As the various human investigators began to share their findings, a terrifying picture emerged. The galaxy was facing an enemy that had been planning this campaign for generations. An enemy that knew the weaknesses of every species and had the patience to exploit those weaknesses at exactly the right moment. The question was no longer who was behind the attacks. The question was whether humanity and its allies could survive the return of the galaxy's original masters. The attack on New Haven came just before dawn when most of the colonists were still asleep in their homes. Sheriff Tony Davis had been awake all night, watching the motion sensors and night vision cameras he had placed around the settlement. When the alarm started screaming, he was ready. Tony grabbed his rifle and ran to the communication center. "All units, this is Sheriff Davis. We are under attack. Repeat, New Haven is under attack. All armed colonists report to defensive positions immediately." The attackers moved like ghosts through the early morning darkness. They were tall and thin, wearing some kind of adaptive camouflage that made them almost invisible against the landscape. But Tony had prepared his people well. Unlike the other vanished colonies, New Haven was going to fight back. Maria Santos took position on the roof of the town hall with a hunting rifle and a thermal scope. Through the scope, she could see the attackers moving toward the settlement. In organized groups, they moved with military precision, but they seemed surprised when the colonists started shooting back. "Tony, these things aren't expecting resistance," Maria called over her radio. "They're pulling back every time we return fire." Down in the streets, colonist Jake Morrison was leading a group of farmers and miners who had grabbed whatever weapons they could find. Most of them had hunting rifles or pistols. Nothing fancy, but they knew how to use them. When the first group of attackers tried to enter the main street, Jake's people were waiting for them. The battle raged for hours. More advanced than the human colonists, but they seemed confused by the fierce resistance they encountered. Every time they tried to advance, the humans would fall back to prepared positions and continue fighting. Betty Walsh, the young engineer from the mining crew, had rigged improvised explosives from mining charges and fertilizer. When a group of attackers tried to surround the school where the children were hiding, Betty's bombs sent them running back into the darkness. Colonel Frank Turner arrived with the 15th Colonial Marine Battalion just as the sun was rising over New Haven. His dropships landed in the center of town, and 200 fully armed Marines deployed to reinforce the colonists. Turner was amazed by what he found. The small frontier settlement had held off a coordinated attack by an unknown enemy for over 6 hours. The colonists were tired and scared, but they were still fighting. Sheriff Davis Turner called as he approached the command post. "What's the situation?" Tony looked exhausted but determined. "Colonel, we've been fighting these things all night. They're fast, they're smart, and they have some kind of stealth technology. But they don't seem to know how to handle people who fight back." Turner studied the tactical situation. His Marines were already taking up positions around the settlement, using their advanced sensors to track the enemy forces. What he saw through his thermal imaging surprised him. The attackers were regrouping in the hills around New Haven, but they weren't preparing for another assault. They were watching, studying how the human defenders operated. Sergeant Nina Cooper, one of Turner's best squad leaders, had captured one of the attackers during the fighting. The prisoner was tall and gaunt, with pale skin that seemed to absorb light. Its eyes were large and dark, adapted for seeing in low-light conditions. Colonel Nina reported, "This thing won't talk, but I think it's been studying us. Look at this device it was carrying." The device looked like some kind of recording equipment, designed to capture audio and visual data. Turner realized with growing alarm that the attack on New Haven hadn't been intended to destroy the colony. It had been a test. Dr. Helen Brooks arrived on the next transport with a team of xenobiologists. She immediately began studying the captured attacker, trying to understand its biology and technology. "Colonel Turner," Helen said after several hours of examination, "this creature is definitely not from any known galactic species. Its bone structure and muscle development suggest it evolved on a high-gravity world, probably with limited sunlight." Turner nodded grimly. "What about its technology, Doctor?" "Fascinating and disturbing," Helen replied. "The equipment is clearly advanced, but it's designed to be undetectable by standard galactic sensors. These beings have been watching us for a long time, learning about our capabilities and weaknesses." Meanwhile, Captain Jake Martinez was leading a joint task force aboard the heavy cruiser Defiant. His mission was to investigate the staging areas that reconnaissance teams had discovered in the galactic void. Lieutenant Commander Alex Rivera had taken his survey crew deep into the dark spaces between star systems, where ancient shipyards had been abandoned for thousands of years. What they found there made Jake's blood run cold. The shipyards were active again. Massive construction platforms were building new vessels, using technology that seemed to blend ancient designs with modern capabilities. The ships being constructed were unlike anything in the current galactic databases. "Commander Martinez," Alex reported over the communication link, "you need to see this. The shipyards are producing vessels designed for stealth operations and planetary assault. Based on the construction rate, they'll have a full invasion fleet ready within months." Jake studied the intelligence data that Alex had gathered. The enemy wasn't just testing individual colonies anymore. They were preparing for a full-scale war against every species in the galaxy. Back on New Haven, the situation was about to change dramatically. The attackers had been watching the human defenders for hours, and now they were ready to make contact. A single figure approached the settlement under a white flag. It was taller than the other attackers, wearing more elaborate equipment and moving with obvious authority. Colonel Turner met the figure at the edge of town, accompanied by Sheriff Davis and Dr. Brooks. The creature spoke in a voice like grinding stone, using a universal translator to communicate. "I am Commander Vex, of the predecessor reclamation force. You have proven more resilient than expected." Turner kept his rifle ready, but didn't point it at the creature. "What do you want?" "Your species shows promise," Vex replied. "We have been observing the younger races for many cycles, evaluating their potential. Most species fail our tests and are eliminated, but humans, ... Humans fight even when defeat is certain. Dr. Brooks stepped forward carefully. You're the ones who destroyed the other colonies. We reclaimed what was always ours, Vex corrected. This galaxy belonged to our people long before your species learned to make fire. We withdrew to allow the younger races to develop, to see which ones might prove worthy of serving the predecessor empire. Sheriff Davis couldn't contain his anger anymore. Serve you? After you murdered thousands of innocent people? Vex tilted, its head studying Davis with obvious interest. Your emotional responses are ... unusual. Most species become paralyzed by fear when faced with superior force. Humans become more aggressive. Colonel Turner realized what was happening. The attack. A New Haven hadn't been a conquest attempt. It had been a recruitment drive. You're evaluating us, Turner said. Deciding whether we're worth keeping alive. Precisely, Vex replied. Your species has proven capable of adaptation and resistance. We offer you a choice. Join us as junior partners in reclaiming this galaxy, or face extinction alongside the other inferior species. The silence that followed was broken by Sheriff Davis's harsh laugh. Junior partners, you can take your offer and shove it where the sun doesn't shine. Vex seemed genuinely surprised by the rejection. You would choose extinction over survival? Colonel? Turner stepped forward, his voice steady and determined. Mister, you clearly don't know much about humans. We've been fighting hopeless battles since we learned to pick up rocks and hit things with them. If you want this galaxy, you're going to have to take it the hard way. Vex studied the humans for a long moment, then activated a communication device. All units, the human species has rejected our offer. Implement full extermination protocols. Yes. Vex disappeared back into the darkness. Turner activated his emergency communicator. This is Colonel Turner to all Colonial Defense Network units. We are now at war with an enemy calling itself the Predecessor Empire. All human colonies are to implement maximum defensive measures immediately. The war had begun, and humanity had just declared its intention to fight against impossible odds. But as Turner looked around at the determined faces of the New Haven defenders, he couldn't help but smile. The predecessors thought they were dealing with just another weak galactic species. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Admiral Lisa Carter stood in the war room at Colonial Defense Network headquarters, looking at reports from across the galaxy. The predecessor ultimatum had been transmitted to every human colony and military base. The enemy had given humanity 72 hours to reconsider their rejection, but Lisa already knew what the answer would be. Ma'am, her aide Lieutenant Ben Clark said as he entered the room. We've received responses from all Colonial Defense Network commanders. The vote is unanimous. We fight. Lisa nodded grimly. She had expected nothing less from humanity's military leaders. But the decision meant they were now at war with an enemy that had been planning this campaign for centuries. The first joint strike against a predecessor stronghold was assigned to Major Chris Powell and his Special Operations team. The target was a forward base in the Vega system that intelligence had identified as a staging area for attacks on nearby colonies. Powell's team was unusual even. By human standards, in addition to his own Marines, he had volunteers from several alien species who wanted to help fight the predecessors. Kelvik was a Zephyrian tech warrior whose people specialized in electronic warfare. Vorthok was a Drachnary shock trooper who stood nearly 3 meters tall and could tear through armor with his bare hands. Major Powell, Kelvak said as they approached the target system, our sensors indicate heavy defensive positions around the asteroid base. The predecessors have energy shields and automated weapon systems. Powell studied the tactical display and smiled. Kelvak, you and your people focus on disabling their electronic systems. Vorthok, your warriors can handle the heavy fighting once we're inside. My Marines will get us through their defenses. The assault on the predecessor base became a lesson in human military doctrine, while the alien forces tried to match the enemy's advanced technology with their own sophisticated weapons. Powell's Marines used tactics that would have made their ancestors proud. Corporal Danny Walsh, the demolitions expert who had served with Captain Foster, led the initial breach. Instead of trying to penetrate the energy shields directly, Danny used shape charges to collapse part of the asteroid, creating a hole that bypassed the shield generators entirely. Human tactics are unusual, Vorthok commented as he watched the Marines work. You do not fight with honor. Honor doesn't keep you alive, Danny replied, as he set another explosive charge. Results do. The battle for the asteroid base raged. For 6 hours, the predecessors fought with the efficiency of experienced hunters, but they seemed confused by human tactics. They had expected their enemies to engage in formal combat, following established rules of warfare that most galactic species observed. Instead, Powell's Marines used every dirty trick they could think of. They booby-trapped corridors, used improvised weapons, and attacked from unexpected directions. The predecessors were skilled fighters, but they had never faced an enemy that seemed to consider every rule of civilized warfare as merely a suggestion. Engineer, Ali Mason, jury-rigged, explosive. Devices from maintenance equipment and mining tools. She turned the asteroid's own industrial systems against the defenders, causing power failures and environmental hazards that forced the predecessors to fight on multiple fronts. Medic Corporal Steve Johnson kept wounded soldiers fighting with nothing but determination and basic medical supplies. When conventional painkillers ran out, Steve used psychological techniques to help injured Marines continue fighting through sheer willpower. The breakthrough came when Powell's team reached the base's command center. The predecessor commander was a tall, imposing figure who seemed genuinely surprised that his sophisticated defenses had been overcome by what he considered primitive tactics. Your methods are barbaric, the predecessor commander said through his translator as Powell's Marines secured the facility. Our methods work, Powell replied. That's all that matters. Meanwhile, Dr. Paul Morgan's archaeological research was finally revealing the predecessor's greatest weakness. After studying dozens of ancient sites, Paul had discovered something that changed everything about how humanity viewed their enemy. The predecessors had evolved on a relatively peaceful world with few natural predators. They had become apex hunters through intelligence and stealth rather than direct confrontation. Their entire military doctrine was based on avoiding prolonged combat and eliminating enemies quickly through superior technology and surprise. Admiral Carter Paul reported during a briefing at Colonial Defense Network headquarters, the predecessors are excellent hunters, but they're terrible soldiers. Their species never developed the kind of sustained combat doctrine that humanity perfected through thousands of years of warfare. Lisa studied Paul's research with growing excitement. Are you saying they can't handle extended battles? Exactly. Admiral, every engagement they've won has been quick and decisive. They overwhelm their targets with superior technology, then retreat if they encounter serious resistance. They've never had to fight a war of attrition. The tide began to turn. When Captain Amy Rodriguez took command of the experimental stealth ship Phantom, her mission was to use hit-and-run tactics against predecessor supply lines and communication networks. Rodriguez's crew included pilot Lieutenant Jake Morrison and weapons specialist Petty Officer Carol Torres. All three had volunteered for what was essentially a suicide mission. But they believed their tactics could make a difference. The Phantom was designed using a combination of human, stealth technology, and alien defensive systems. It could approach predecessor positions undetected and strike before disappearing back into the darkness of space. Captain Jake Morrison reported as they approached their first target, predecessor convoy detected. 3 supply ships with minimal escort. Rodriguez studied the tactical display. The convoy was carrying equipment and supplies to forward bases, exactly the kind of target that could disrupt enemy operations without requiring a major battle. Carol, are the weapons ready? Missiles armed and ready, Captain. We can take out all 3 ships with a single strike? But Rodriguez had a different idea. No, Carol. We're going to disable the ships and capture the supplies. Let's see how the predecessors handle having their own equipment used against them. The attack was swift and precise. The Phantom struck the convoy's escort ships first, then used targeted strikes to disable the supply vessels without destroying them. Within minutes, Rodriguez's crew had captured 3 ships full of predecessor technology and equipment. More importantly, they had demonstrated that human tactics could be effective against supposedly superior enemy forces. Word of the successful raid spread quickly through the colonial defense network, boosting morale and proving that the predecessors could be beaten. The real breakthrough came when intelligence analysts began studying the captured predecessor equipment. The technology was advanced, but it was also specialized for specific types of combat. The predecessors had designed their weapons and defensive systems to counter the kind of organized, predictable warfare that most galactic species practiced. They had never encountered an enemy that used improvised tactics, symmetric warfare, and sheer stubbornness as primary military strategies. Dr. Helen Brooks, now working with a joint human-alien research team, made another crucial discovery. The predecessors had been studying galactic species for centuries, but their intelligence was based on observing normal behavior, not combat situations. They know how we live, how we work, how we organize our societies, Helen explained during a strategy meeting. But they don't understand how we fight when our survival is at stake. They've never seen humans in a real war. Admiral Carter began implementing new strategies based on these discoveries. Instead of trying to match predecessor technology with superior equipment, human forces would rely on unpredictability, adaptability, the kind of brutal persistence that had allowed humanity to survive on Earth for millions of years. The war. It was far from over, but for the first time since the predecessors had revealed themselves, humanity had hope. The enemy might have superior technology and centuries of preparation, but they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated what humans were capable of. When they were fighting for their survival, as reports of successful human operations reached alien leaders throughout the galaxy, something unexpected began to happen. Species that had been paralyzed by fear started to reconsider their own defensive strategies. If humans could fight the predecessors and win, perhaps there was hope for everyone. The galaxy was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the best weapons, but the one who refuses to give up no matter how impossible the odds become. The final confrontation came much sooner than anyone expected. Admiral Lisa Carter received the emergency alert while reviewing battle reports in her command center. The predecessors had launched a massive fleet toward Earth itself, abandoning their careful strategy in favor of a direct assault on humanity's homeworld. Admiral Lieutenant Ben Clark reported, his voice tight with concern. Long-range sensors detect over 300 predecessor ships approaching the Sol system. They'll reach Earth in 18 hours. Lisa felt a cold smile cross her face. The predecessors had made exactly the mistake she had been hoping for. They were angry, frustrated by human resistance, and now they were abandoning the patient tactics that had made them so dangerous. Ben, send word to all Colonial Defense Network units. Tell them to implement Operation Homecoming immediately. Operation Homecoming was humanity's ultimate defensive strategy. Every available ship, every trained soldier, every piece of military equipment would converge on Earth for a final battle. It was a desperate plan. But Lisa knew it was also exactly what the predecessors wouldn't expect. General Patricia Hill coordinated the defense from her command bunker, deep beneath the North American continent. Patricia had been planning Earth's defense for months, turning the planet's diverse environments into weapons that could be used against any invader. All units, this is General Hill, Patricia announced over the global communication network. The enemy is coming to us, which means we get to choose the battlefield. Make them pay for every meter of ground. The first predecessor ships entered Earth's atmosphere over the Arctic regions, where Colonel Frank Turner had positioned his best cold-weather troops. Turner's soldiers had trained in conditions that would kill most galactic species, and they knew how to use the environment as an ally. Captain Ryan Foster, now commanding a battalion of Arctic specialists, watched through his binoculars as predecessor. Dropships landed in the frozen wasteland. Alien soldiers that emerged were clearly suffering from the extreme cold, their movements slow and clumsy in the sub-zero temperatures. All squads, this is Foster, Ryan transmitted to his scattered units. Let them come to us. The cold will do half our work for us. The battle in the Arctic became a nightmare for the predecessors. They had studied human settlements and cities, but they had never experienced Earth's hostile natural environments. The Arctic winds cut through their equipment. The snow made their stealth technology useless, and the extreme cold affected their weapons systems. Meanwhile, in the tropical jungles of South America, Major Chris Powell was leading a different kind of defense. His combined human-alien team had prepared the jungle itself as a trap, using the dense vegetation and dangerous wildlife to create obstacles that the predecessors couldn't overcome. Kelvik the Zephyrian had learned to appreciate human tactics during their previous battles together. Major Powell, the enemy cannot use their energy weapons effectively in this environment. The plant life absorbs their beam dispersal. That's the idea, Kelvik, Powell replied as he watched predecessor forces struggle through the thick undergrowth. We're not just fighting them, we're making the planet fight them too. Vorthok, the Drachnary warrior, had never imagined he would be fighting alongside humans in defense of their home world. But the experience had taught him something important about courage. Humans fight differently when protecting their nest, he observed. Other species retreat to safer positions. Humans become more dangerous. The urban warfare in Earth's major cities became legendary. The predecessors had expected to find defenseless civilian populations, but instead they encountered organized resistance in every neighborhood. Sheriff Tony Davis, now serving as a liaison between civilian and military forces, had helped train ordinary citizens in guerrilla warfare tactics. Every building is a fortress, Tony explained to a group of predecessor prisoners after one battle. Every street is a trap. This isn't just our planet, it's our home, and we'll fight for every inch of it. The breakthrough came when Sergeant Nina Cooper, leading a special infiltration team, discovered the location of the predecessor command ship. The massive vessel was hiding behind Earth's moon, directing the invasion fleet through encrypted communications. Nina's team included both human specialists and alien volunteers who had been inspired by humanity's refusal to surrender. Thokvar, a Drachnary warrior who had lost his own homeworld to the predecessors, insisted on joining the mission. Sergeant Cooper, Thokvar said as they prepared for the assault, "My people believed resistance was futile. You have shown us that defeat is a choice, not destiny." Shardsinger, a crystalline defender whose species had never engaged in warfare, had also volunteered for the mission. Human courage is infectious, Shardsinger admitted. We have learned that some things are worth fighting for, even when victory seems impossible. The assault on the predecessor command ship became the galaxy's first truly joint military operation. Human soldiers provided the aggressive tactics and determination, while alien specialists contributed their unique abilities. Captain Amy Rodriguez piloted the stealth ship that carried the infiltration team through the predecessor fleet's defenses. Her experience with hit-and-run tactics proved invaluable as she navigated between enemy ships that were still focused on the battle raging on Earth's surface. Dr. Monica Bell, forensic specialist who had first examined predecessor technology, used her knowledge of their systems to disable the command ship's security measures. Their technology is advanced, but it's also predictable, Monica explained as she worked. They never learned to prepare for completely illogical attack patterns. The final confrontation took place in the command ship's central chamber, where Captain Ryan Foster came face to face with the predecessor's supreme commander. The ancient being was even taller and more imposing than the other predecessors, with equipment that seemed to be integrated directly into its body. "You have proven more resourceful than anticipated," the supreme commander admitted as Foster's team surrounded it. "We studied your species for decades, but we did not understand the full extent of your irrationality." Foster kept his weapon. "Trained on the alien leader, but didn't fire. We're not irrational, we're just stubborn. There's a difference." "Your tactical decisions make no logical sense," the Supreme Commander continued. "You sacrifice strategic positions to save individual soldiers. You waste resources on emotional responses. You continue fighting even when defeat is mathematically certain. That's what makes us human," Foster replied. "We don't fight because we think we can win. We fight because it's the right thing to do." The predecessor Supreme Commander studied Foster for a long moment, then activated a communication device. "All predecessor forces, this is Supreme Commander Nexus. Implement immediate withdrawal from all contested systems." The war ended not with humanity's victory, but with the galaxy's victory. The predecessors, faced with united resistance and tactics they couldn't counter, agreed to a treaty that recognized the sovereignty of all inhabited worlds. But the real victory was in what the conflict had revealed about the galaxy's potential. The various species had learned that they were stronger together than apart, that courage could be more powerful than technology. Dr. Helen Brooks compiled the final report on the war from her office on Earth. As she looked out at the rebuilding cities and the mixed crews of human and alien workers, she realized that something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. The predecessors made one crucial mistake, Helen wrote in her conclusion. They believed that superior technology and careful planning would always defeat inferior equipment and desperate courage. They never understood that the most dangerous enemy isn't the one with the best weapons, but the one who refuses to accept defeat. Humanity's greatest export to the galaxy wasn't our technology or our resources. It was our stubborn refusal to give up when the odds were against us. We showed the galaxy that hope isn't just a feeling. It's a choice that becomes more powerful when it's shared. The war was over, but the peace that followed was built on something stronger than treaties or trade agreements. It was built on the understanding that when different species stood together, they could face any challenge the universe might throw at them. The galaxy had been waiting in fear for the return of ancient terrors. But when the Deathworlders stepped from the shadows, they brought something the darkness couldn't overcome. They brought the idea that no fight is truly hopeless as long as someone is willing to keep fighting.